Hello and welcome. You are about to watch the video or presentation called Bereavement and Other Losses as part of the Wellbeing Education Resilience Programme. We'd like to draw your attention to the Face COVID video by Russ Harris. If you haven't already watched it, please do take 5 minutes to have a look. It gives a great overview of how to support wellbeing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can click directly on the link below from the PowerPoint presentation when it's in slideshow mode.
This is the fourth video in the Watch element of the WER programme. It focuses on bereavement and other losses. There may be key concepts that are touched upon very briefly in this video that are explained more detail in the concept index video. These are marked with a blue star with CI in the middle. Should you want any further information or have any questions on anything covered in this webinar, you can book onto one of our Q&A conferences.
The Bereavement and Other Losses section of the WER programme is split into 4 parts. This slide shows you which part you're about to watch and also lists the other parts in case there are any other aspects you would like to find out more about.
Within this webinar, the following topics will be covered. Recognising the various types of loss that children and young people experience as they age, and how has COVID-19 pandemic impacted on experiences of loss and bereavement. If you see this symbol of a thought bubble with activity in the middle, please pause the video if you wish to take time to do the suggested activity or reflection. Whilst watching this video, please be kind to yourself and pay attention how you're feeling throughout. Should you need to pause or stop the video to take a break, please do so. Or you may wish to reach out to a friend or a family member. If you'd like to seek further support, there's some information of how you can do so on the final slide. Alternatively, you could talk to your school's mental health lead and they can put you in touch with your school's wellbeing service practitioner. This slide looks at the idea of people's anxieties they may have when talking to somebody about death or loss or bereavement. We may sometimes avoid talking about it to a child, a young person, or a staff member, a colleague, or a friend because we may have that anxiety about upsetting them, or maybe we might think that we'll become upset ourselves and this might upset them further. Well, this slide is here to challenge that idea and that way of thinking. Because loss and bereavement affects us all, it's really important to normalise it and especially with children and young people, make them realise that it is a part of life that we are all going to experience at some point. And letting them know that it's okay to become upset and it is okay also not to be upset. And that's the same with yourself. If you are talking to somebody about loss and bereavement, it's okay for you to become upset as well. It's any emotion that you feel in loss or bereavement is a totally natural emotion. By becoming upset, if you're talking to a child or a young person about loss and bereavement, this is actually modelling to them how to manage or recover from those feelings. So for example, you may shed a little bit of a tear and you're letting them know that actually it's okay to be upset in this situation. And then however you recover from that, whether it be that you apologise and get a tissue, whether it be that you make a cup of tea, maybe it's that you excuse yourself and you just need to take a deep breath and take a break from the conversation. All of these things are showing them, are providing them examples of ways that they can actually help recover from feeling upset themselves. And it's also really important to make sure that you have someone to support you as well as the children and young people when talking about bereavement or loss to them. It may be that you need them to take over from the conversation because actually by having that conversation it's really striking emotions in yourself that you feel you may not be able to continue. But it's important for that child to have this conversation. So maybe you want someone who's there to take over from you. Or it may be that actually you just want someone to talk to following the conversation. Because it's really important to remember that although you're there to support that child or that young person, you also do need to make sure you're getting the support for yourself too. It would be really helpful actually if you could just take a moment to click on this link here and watch this example of emotion coaching. It's from the Disney Pixar film, Inside Out. And they are looking at a really good way to try and support a young person on a sad experience of loss themselves. It looks at the character Sadness and Bing Bong, and it's just a really good example of, by showing your emotion, it can actually help the other person recover and feel better themselves as well. So if you do have the time, please look at that clip. If not, keep going and we'll go on to the next slide.
When we're thinking about bereavement and loss, it's not just the idea of people dying or of death, but the experience of loss that we experience all the way through our lives, from being a very little person all the way through to being an adult. And here is a list of various different losses that we can experience, different levels of intensity. It may also depend on our age when we experience them and what's going on around us at that time and how resilient we are and what support networks we've got to kind of help us to cope with these things. Often we experience things as we were younger, and they help us to prepare for and to understand and cope with the pain and other feelings that are associated with loss and grief as we go through life. Some of the things here, I think we've all experienced, or a lot of us may have experienced, the idea of being near a child when they've lost their favourite toy. So, a little person has lost their blankie or their favourite bunny, and actually how distressing that can be for them, and actually how much pain that can cause, and how, it's quite an experience for everybody to go through that. Often we have the idea of having pets and owning pets and how we manage when pets die, and how that's kind of understood by children and how they understand the process of that. And then there's lots of other things as they go through school, things like changing friendship groups, so friends that might move away, or they just start to hang out with other children and play in, and sometimes they might miss a friend that's gone somewhere else, or they just don't play with anymore. Moving schools or classes, things like growing up to different schools, moving from year 6 to 7, from primary to secondary, from going to secondary to college, or from college to university, or into the world of work. So there are lots of different changes as we go. In terms of families, there may be moves like moving house or relocating to another part of the country or even a different country altogether. Some children and young people really feel lots of emotions around the loss of their childhood and childhood innocence, and they may grieve a sense of rituals and things or beliefs that they may have had when they were younger that were lovely to have, and suddenly their kind of bubble's been burst and they don't have those feelings anymore. And they may really want to seek out that kind of reassurance and feelings that they had when they believed in those things when they were younger. It may be that they are struggling with the idea of growing up and leaving behind certain things that they used to do when they were a child. The idea of puberty and their changing bodies, that can be quite a struggle for some young people to cope with. So all these things around changes and loss don't have to be around, losing people. Actually, it can be about loss of something in their own lives as they grow and develop. Things around breaking up with people, relationship breakups, divorces, these kind of living losses where you are learning to live in a world where these people that you are no longer in touch with or in a relationship with still exist and still go on. And that's a very different kind of experience to kind of manage and learn to deal with than a death bereavement. Having a child with significant difficulties in the family as well can provide sometimes experiences for loss, maybe loss of opportunities or loss of experiences, or loss of skills as you're watching a child or a family member to kind of find things more and more difficult as their difficulties increase. So this can be really difficult as well, and it's really important to think about children who are young carers for either parents or family members or with siblings, and actually how they're managing their experiences of loss. So generally we learn about these experiences that we have, and there isn't a set order of these. Some young people might be flung into quite extreme experience, intense experience of loss without having accumulated any earlier experiences. Or there may be children, young people who have something significant happen to them, but who have accumulated lots of losses in their life, and they're quite equipped and actually quite able to understand what is happening to them in the here and the now, and not be so scared about some of the things they're experiencing because they've had some other experiences of loss before, which has given them some kind of structure to understand what they might be feeling now. So continuing on in thinking about those different examples of feeling loss, it's activity time now if you would like to do the activity. So the activity is around thinking of a time that isn't too overwhelming for you to recall or think about. It may be that you, as you were looking at that list previously, you started to think about some of your own experiences. But have a think about a time when you were not able to go somewhere or do something that you'd been looking forward to, and try and reconnect with that, an example of that kind of loss. It can be from any time in your life from when you were little, or it could be some time from more recently. And I think in the current situation that we're all living in, and in lockdowns, and with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's particularly relevant that we've all been stopped from doing certain things at certain times. So just try and think about an example of that. And if you are okay to think about it, can you name any feelings that you had when you weren't able to do this event or go to this event that you were looking forward to? And what kind of thoughts were you having linked to those feelings? What kinds of things popped up in your head? What kind of thoughts did you have? And in particular, who helped you to feel better? And if somebody did help you to feel better, what was it that they did that helped you? What was it that you found useful to help you manage or cope with that situation, that feeling of loss? So if you'd like to give yourself a couple of minutes of activity, now is the time to pause the video. And if you don't want to finish, do this activity, you can just carry on watching the video. So for those of you that did that activity just then, I don't know what feelings you came up with in your own mind when you're thinking about your experiences that you've had, but here are a list here of different feelings of loss that we can have when we're experiencing loss or bereavements of any kind. And I don't think you'll be too surprised by some of the feelings that are within this list. It's okay to feel any one of these feelings linked to loss. It's okay to feel some of them or none of them or a couple of them. It's not a tick list. There's not a linear list of feelings that you should move through at any one time. It's a very individual experience. And actually, it's not for any one person to expect another person to feel a certain way. The dual process model of coping with bereavement that's on the other side of the screen is really, really helpful in helping us to think about how other people might be feeling and behaving, and how that might compare to how we're feeling and behaving. So the dual process model is thinking about how the wider oval shape there is a kind of the whole experience of loss and grief, and all the different feelings and experience of being in it. And then within that feeling of grief, there are kind of two sort of different types of behaviour and a feeling. So one is a kind of a busy doing mode, where somebody is not so much connected to their feelings, but is in, I need to get these tasks done. So I need to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And these tasks help them to almost keep themselves busy and not connected so much to their feelings. And then at other times, you might be more connected to how you're feeling, and you might be more emotional. So you might experience feelings of loss, any of those feelings on the other side of the page, but you might actually behave in ways or realise and recognise that you are feeling certain things. And the lines between those two is to indicate that actually we move from one mode to the other mode. We have this dual process whereby we're processing the feelings that we're having, but we're also processing jobs that we need to be doing and behaviours that we need to get on with in order to live our lives, and how sometimes being busy helps us to process and to just manage the experience of grief. Sometimes we need to go and do something in order to give our emotional bodies, part of our bodies, a rest, in order for us to then have some more time where we connect with our feelings and experience something and feel it. And sometimes when we're feeling it, we can't then do at the same time. So we have to stop what we're doing and just go and do something that makes us feel better, or just spend some time, having a good cry, or doing something, watching a sad film, or doing something that where we are feeling, or if we're feeling really ratty and angry and niggly, just to kind of allow ourselves to experience that. When we're thinking about children and young people, what's really interesting is that as adults, we tend to stick into one mode for a kind of longer periods of time. So if we're feeling in our busy mode, we can stay in that mode for a considerable amount of time. Or if we're feeling loss, we may really feel that extensively. What children tend to do is they kind of almost, if you think of these as kind of puddles, they puddle jump really quickly from one to another. So particularly younger children do this incredibly quickly. So a young child can be really upset, experiencing real sense of loss, be absolutely overwhelmed, and be really distressed. And then suddenly, you're outside, look at them outside, and then, oh, look, there they are out on the playground, running around, laugh with their friends. And as adults, this can be quite bewildering sometimes. And it's really helpful to think about these puddles and how it might be the child was really upset and now they've gone into busy, I'm going to go and play mode. Whereas an adult may well stick with that feeling a bit longer. And I think sometimes adults can feel a little bit duped, if they've been supporting a child and they have kind of almost gone into that puddle with them, they've joined them with that feeling of loss. And the adult is then going to sit with that feeling of loss for a little bit longer than the child or young person might. And it may be, gosh, was that real? Were they really that upset? Because, 5 seconds later, they're now laughing and joking with their friends. And whereas I'm still feeling very sad. So this is why we don't always match how quickly we each move from one mode to the other mode. And it's just really important to bear this in mind sometimes. It can help us to understand why other people might be behaving in different ways than we are, because they may well be in different puddles. And in families and in school systems and school families, it's difficult sometimes to both be on the same page at the same time. So you may have an adult supporting a child and an adult wants to do a task, whereas the young person's doing a feeling. Or it may be that the adult is feeling as though they want to connect, but actually the young person doesn't want to do that because they're in their busy task mode and they just want to get on. So it's just helpful to have this as a visual model in your head. And if you're feeling a bit, weird about the way that someone's behaving, or you're feeling like, you're not quite sure why you're not connected with somebody, then just return to this model and have a look at it, because it might help you to understand that a bit more. If we turn to thinking about COVID-19 pandemic specifically now, and the certain losses that families and children, young people and staff in schools and other professionals have been experiencing, Barry Carpenter has written a lot about the idea of a recovery curriculum, and he talks about 5 particular losses that he believes children, young people during lockdowns and the pandemic in general have been experiencing. So these 5 losses here: routine, structure, physical and friendship kind of contact, opportunities, and freedom from and freedom to. And all of these kind of experiences and losses have led certain children, young people, not everybody, but some children, young people, to experience either anxiety, perhaps more traumatic type responses and feelings, or they've led them to experience bereavements and other losses. So the kind of losses that he's talking about is routine and structure. Not knowing what might be happening, this kind of the idea of uncertainty. We don't know what's happening today, tomorrow, in the next half term, the next few months. This can be really unsettling and can cause everybody of any age great anxiety. Adults have been very unsettled, and this can be picked up on by children, young people. It's been very difficult because our routines have been constantly, it feels like the goalposts constantly shift, and people have been very flexible in responding to establishing new routines. But this has been very challenging when just the level of uncertainty that we've been living with and continue to live with is very wobbly and continually changing. Losses and disruption to routines and structure may have been quite traumatic experiences for some children, young people, particularly if they've experienced trauma or traumatic experiences in the past. Children, young people may have felt like quite bereaved and experienced grave loss, to have been separated from friends, to family, physical contact with one another, particularly for teens and teenagers. Physical touch with their peers is really important. It's almost like a living bereavement type experience. So knowing that person is alive and out there, but not being able to be with them or to be able to give them a hug or hang out with them, it can be really painful. Loss of opportunities. So there's been so many opportunities that young people and children and students have lost. Rites of passage, end of year celebrations, transition events, school assemblies, leavers assemblies, proms, GCSE and exam periods, key sort of transition experiences of helping them to move on to another school, lots of lasts, lots of firsts, various things, birthdays, celebrations, so many opportunities that they haven't been able to get. And there have been opportunities that young people have told us that they have gained in this experience too. But we must not oversee and forget about the opportunities that have been lost and how that may feel in terms of a loss that's been experienced. Freedom from and freedom to. So we would love to have children to be free from worry, fear, illness and loss. But these are things that young people are having to think about. And freedom too. They've lost the freedom to go out as they want, to see who they want, to have physical contact with who they want, to have their passages and key events happening. So there has been freedoms in a variety of experiences. And if you want to hear more about these, then you can click on the link down below to read some more information about Barry Carpenter and what he talks about in terms of a recovery curriculum to help young people cope with these 5 losses that they've experienced. Many schools in Thurrock have been using the idea of a recovery curriculum, and this was the thing that Barry Carpenter advocated in terms of how to use these particular 5 levers that school staff and school systems can use to assist children and young people in their recovery from the experiences they've had through this COVID-19 pandemic. We want to talk about the idea of recovery as being an ongoing theme, because it isn't actually an easy time to help recover when we're actually still very much within the pandemic. So recovery has to be an ongoing theme, whereby we are constantly checking in to see where we're at, what we need to do next, and how our school as a whole is managing and responding to the ups and downs and the ins and outs of school and home learning and all the other experiences they're having. So the 5 levers that Barry Carpenter promotes is listed here. So we have relationships, community, transparent curriculum, metacognition and space. So just to talk about these in a little bit more detail. So relationships are key, and we know this is the key theme, the most important theme really that runs through the whole of the WER programme, the idea of and the importance of relationships within schools and families. So we need to invest in and we need to restore the relationships, particularly fractured ones where people may have been out of touch or not being so close to each other. We need to start rebuilding and restoring some of those relationships and friendships. The idea of community is about engaging with each child's different experiences. And this is mentioned in some of the other PowerPoint presentations around the idea of listening to what the children have experienced, what their young people have been experiencing at home, within their family, and just thinking about what's going on in the school community, what's going on in the staff community, and for individual members of staff, for the whole staff, what's going on in the wider community, whereabouts are you in your school, what part of Thurrock are you in, what's going on around the area, where else are you linking to, what's happening across the UK as a whole, and in thinking about the worldwide kind of nature of things and what's happening. So just thinking about keeping all of those things in mind, but really specifically focusing on the children, young people's different experiences they've had within their families, and listening to their stories and finding out about what they've been doing, what they've been up to, what's going on, and just kind of catching up with that really. Being transparent about the curriculum. So it's about thinking about acknowledging things that they might have lost, experiences they might have lost, losses of learning, but also recognising the new skills they might have gained and different activities that they might have been able to do at home with their families that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do had they been going to school every day. So it's about addressing these, acknowledging, being curious, finding out what's been going on, and then co-constructing with the children, young people, what the next steps are with students. Be really clear on your plans, be clear with what's happening and re-establishing this routine. And I know that schools are very, very good at being clear on routines and what's happening during the day and across the week and across the half term, sharing termly plans. But it's even more important now to really communicate with children and families and young people about what's going to happen next and how the school are expecting them to move forward with their different lessons and their different studies. Metacognition is about thinking about how people learn and how individual people learn best, or live life in different ways, and acknowledging this. Students need to maybe reskill up or rebuild their confidence as learners, perhaps. They may be used to very fluid or not so very formal learning, or they may have been very used to certain types of like online learning, lots of sitting. They might not be used to coming back into a classroom and moving around lots and negotiating things with lots of other young people around them again. So they may need to readapt that. Space is important to kind of rediscover the kind of changes that they'll feel as they come back into school, or they settle back into school, or they move on to the next key stage as things start to settle and transition, start to move on again. So maybe they come back to school and then they'll have to move on to another school. So giving children and people space to discover themselves, to think about what's right for them, and to find their voice, to be able to give them opportunities to give feedback, to contribute to what's going on, to give them time to talk together, give them time to talk with their families and with staff, and provide opportunities for them to explore. And you can do that alongside still having high expectations of what you as a school staff wish your children, young people to be doing, but also allow them that space to kind of think about what it is that they want and need for themselves too. Emotion coaching approaches allows the acknowledgement of all of these losses and the establishment of new boundaries and routines collaboratively and problem solving together. So have a look at the emotion coaching in the concept index, because that's a really good way of thinking about it. And schools who have already been promoting their recovery curriculum and they've already got some of these things in place, or all of these things in place, emotion coaching could be a really good next step in thinking about how these can be further developed and how we can support young people moving forwards on a day-by-day basis. We can also think about how schools can develop and look at adapting these levers and putting them through, implementing them through a whole school approach, through their values of kindness and compassion, of hope, connection and belonging, and thinking about how the ideas of recovery and these levers really work through their school, like the stick of rock that we have on here. So wherever you look at through the school system, you'll see these 5 levers being really utilised and prioritised all the way through the systems and policies and practice within a school. So as I was just saying on the previous slide, if your school has already established and been committed to a recovery curriculum since September 2020, last September, you can continue to deepen these opportunities throughout a whole school approach to wellbeing. And this links to the other webinar that you can watch around a whole school approach to wellbeing. It's thinking about reviewing how the levers and the values throughout your policies and practice are. So thinking about your sticks of rock and thinking about wherever you go in your school, if you go to the school playground and you crack open your stick of rock, are you seeing your values and these levers throughout your practice and your policies? Thinking particularly about the values that we're promoting through the WER programme. So compassion and kindness, hope, connection and belonging. And if you want to find out more about these values, they are explained in more detail in the concept index. And as I was saying before, increasing school staff's understanding and use of and skills in emotion coaching. We can use emotion coaching with each other as colleagues. We can use them with children, young people. We can teach children, young people to emotion coach between themselves as peers. And we can also emotion coach with parents too, and teach parents how to do emotion coaching with their own children. So there's so many different ways where we can apply emotion coaching. And so strengthening your uses and skills in emotion coaching could be a really good next step for your school.
So now we're going to look at the different types of things that might be going on for different families and our children and young people at home that we may not know about. And these are different experiences of loss and just different experiences they might be having that could be making a bereavement process much harder for them. So in particular, during the pandemic and lockdown on different tier systems, for example, you may find that your young people and children will be experiencing things such as hospital visits and unable to have these visits with their friends and family. They may have to be doing this on their own, or people that have died, they would usually be able to go and visit them beforehand and say their goodbyes, etc., but they're just not able to do that at the moment. This is a big, again, it's another loss, isn't it? It's a loss of a form of closure for them. You've got long-term shielding worries. They may be worrying for themselves if they're having to shield, or a family member. Caring for siblings with SEND needs. Not being able to meet up with friends or extended families. So these would normally be big support networks, and they're missing out on that at the moment. The earlier bereavements or grief reawakened by lockdown or COVID-19 pandemic. So as discussed in one of our other slides, they may have experienced a bereavement and of something that's caused grief before the pandemic, but the changes in routine and the changes of life in itself may have reawakened those feelings of grief. So there may be children who are bereaved by other causes other than COVID-19. And you may have a loss of parents being at home who are key workers, and the worry of children and young people have about their safety. So parents who may normally have been at home, or even seeing that their friends have got their parents at home with them and they're not able to have that, their parents are out on the front line, risking their safety every day, and that's a huge worry for them as well. So it's really important that when you're working with families or a child or a young person that may have experienced grief, that you're encouraging that family, the whole family, to be open about what they're experiencing at home at the moment. Or even if you're not aware if they've experienced grief, if you're just working with families, just really try and encourage them to, as I said, be open, talk about their experiences, talk about what's going on for them, and try to get an idea of how they're coping with that, because you may find that some families are experiencing a number of different risk factors in the home that could make bereavement or loss a much harder experience, but actually they're very resilient and they're coping with that fine. Whereas you may have another family who, or just maybe one family member who's experienced one of these, who you might assume it would be a risk factor to be quite easy to deal with, but actually, it's rocked their world. They're finding it really, really hard. So again, it's really important to have those close connections and be curious about what's going on with the family, be supportive for them, and encourage them to share their experiences with you.
The Bereavement and Other Losses section of the WER programme has been split into 4 parts. This slide shows you which part you have just been watching, and also lists the other parts in case you'd like to have a look at any of those too. The Thurrock COVID-19 Child Wellbeing Support Line has been set up to support children, young people, their families and school staff during the coronavirus pandemic. It is for anybody to call or email if they'd like to speak to somebody about an issue or a theme to do with wellbeing. This can be staff from school, parents and family members, young people themselves. If they call the support line number or email the helpline email, leave a message with their name and contact number, and someone from the team will call them back. There are also some other contacts here for local support services. Now we're at the end of this session, it's a good time just to check in with yourself and to see how you're feeling now. As we said in the beginning, the content of the WER programme can impact on how we're thinking or feeling and how it relates to us in our everyday lives. If you've been affected by anything you have read or heard about today, please seek support, either from your own support network, and there's some ideas listed on the slide here, or from additional support networks, whether that's local services or national sources of support. Following on from watching one or more of the videos or presentations in the WER programme, you may have questions about the content or themes from your school around wellbeing more generally. So for the Ask and Share aspect of the WER programme, we've scheduled a series of webinar conferences. These are online events, question and answer sessions that school staff or other professionals can come along to virtually and join us in a panel of people working in Thurrock. At these, questions that have been submitted can be responded to and discussed, or good practice can be shared among the schools. It may be that you want to work collaboratively as a whole staff to decide on what questions will be submitted. And more dates will be added to these conferences throughout the spring and summer term. For more information about the dates and how to book, you can check online to where the presentations are listed, or ask your school's mental health lead for more information.